Welcome to the Resiliency of the Human Spirit podcast, where we share all about human triumphs for the collective's healing and empowerment. I am your host, Priscilla Hanley. My guest today is Jolee Vacchi. Jolee is the founding attorney of Foundations Family Law and Mediation Center, where she strives to resolve family law conflicts as painlessly and peacefully as possible in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Jolee is also the co-host of Divorce Detox, a weekly podcast featuring raw and unfiltered conversations about divorce and co-parenting issues. Without further ado, I will bring Jolee on right now. Hi, Jolee.
Hello, Priscilla. Thank you for inviting me today.
Oh, thank you I know you're busy, so thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here today.
Of course.
So, we connected, I want to say a couple months ago, where you shared your personal story and more specifically your journey through postpartum depression. So I'm actually kind of glad that we're going to be talking about this topic today because I feel that postpartum depression is not talked about more,
I
right?
agree.
And
Yes.
yeah, and I also did some research for our call today. So according to the CDC, 1 in 10 women suffer from postpartum depression. And I want to say that's about like 33 million, maybe.
Yep.
And I have a sense that a large majority of these women are just suffering in silence with postpartum depression. And
Yes.
so I will open the floor to you now, and we can start by you sharing your story and your journey through postpartum depression, and more specifically, the actions you took or the mindset shifts you made to heal yourself and overcome postpartum depression.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. So currently I'm a mom of two right now. My children are 10 and 8 years old. I have a daughter and a son. So when I think back about my postpartum journey, they kind of seem in the rearview mirror for me today, but they really shaped a lot of the direction of my life. So I had my daughter first, and it was a relatively uncomplicated pregnancy, and her birth didn't go perfectly, but it went well enough. And I had her, and I don't think I experienced a severe postpartum depression after her birth, but I did have some like random thoughts every now and again where I would be like afraid if I was holding her in the kitchen, like, oh no, what if I just dropped her and her head hit the side of the stove? Or what if that knife like cut her? It was just like these weird thoughts just that came out of nowhere. And it made me feel guilty that I was just having those thoughts and I had no intentions of hurting her. It was just like these reoccurring negative thoughts that something bad was going to happen to her. And maybe I would be the one that would do that. So I had these weird thoughts, but I managed pretty well despite that. And then I got pregnant with my son right after my daughter's first birthday. So we had our babies pretty much back to back. And I had a pretty uncomplicated pregnancy with my son. And then when it came time to birth him, I had him and his umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck a few times. And so he came out not breathing. And the whole medical team, like they pushed this, the panic button, and all of this medical team descended on our room to resuscitate him. And it was probably only maybe a minute or something that he actually wasn't breathing, but I didn't hear his first cry, and that was extremely like traumatizing. And they'd taken him away from me immediately.
Mhm.
So once they were able to get him to cry and start breathing, they didn't even get to show him to me. They just whisked him off to the NICU. And my husband and my mom were both with me when I gave birth. And it had always been my plan that if anything happened to the baby, my husband was going to go with the baby and my mom was going to stay to me. And that was our plan with my daughter. We never had to put that plan into action. But at that moment, that's what we did. So my husband went with my son, my mom stayed with me. And it was just so heartbreaking to have finally given birth to my baby and he wasn't with me. And I was like, even I'm so glad my mom was there, but essentially I just felt all alone. It was horrible. I had to, deliver my afterbirth and do all the aftercare without my baby. And I didn't know what was going on, what was happening. It was really a scary few hours because I didn't get to see him for a few hours until they took me down to the NICU. And when they did that, thankfully, he was okay and he was able to come into a regular room with me and he ended up doing well. So that was an unexpected, birth experience. I didn't anticipate that. So we went home after a couple of days in the hospital. And my husband had the first week off with me, and then he was planning to go back to work. And that morning, I'll never forget it. He went off to work, said goodbye. Again, luckily, my mom was with me for my first day by myself with, a toddler and an infant. And I just got this weird feeling. We were watching TV and I got this weird sensation and I could just tell that something was off. And I got up, I gave the baby to my mom and I went into the bathroom. And when I got to the bathroom, it looked like one of my organs fell out from inside of me right onto the floor. It looked like a liver or like a lung. It was like so huge and I was just hemorrhaging blood. And so obviously I called for my mom and she came in, she opened the door and it looked like a disaster area. It was like butcher shop with all this blood
Oh
everywhere.
gosh.
And so she called 911 and the paramedics came and unfortunately it was male paramedics and they really didn't understand what was going on with me. They knew they had to get me to the hospital. So luckily they put me in an ambulance. The hospital was about a half hour away from my house. So my mom stayed with the kids, called my husband. I was in the ambulance on the way to the hospital with these two male EMTs. And I was literally hemorrhaging the entire time. And I would say to them, like, should you be doing something to stop this blood? Or like they weren't paying any attention to me. Like there was a more senior EMT and he was trying to teach the junior EMT how to like use the computer software in the back of the ambulance. And so I just felt so alone. I thought that I was going to die. I had come to that conclusion that I was not going to survive this and that my babies were going to grow up without a mom. And it was just profound sense of grief. I just remember like sobbing and seeing my kids growing up throughout their life, like, going through school and getting married and me not being there with them for those special moments. And I was just devastated that I was going to miss out on all that. Luckily, I did survive the ambulance ride and we got to the hospital and it was where I had given birth. So luckily it was, an obstetrics hospital. So they knew what had happened. So I was experiencing, it's called a late postpartum hemorrhage. Essentially, not all of my placenta was delivered after my son was born. So my body still thought I was pregnant and it was sending blood to my uterus to, nourish the baby that wasn't there anymore. And it created this huge clot essentially in my uterus. And then that just like ruptured. And when the scab came off out of me, my body was just still sending blood to my uterus. And I was literally bleeding to death. So I had to get a blood transfusion and I underwent surgery, which saved my life, thankfully. But having those two experiences back to back of, my son being born and having complications and then me having this near-death experience, it was just too much for my body, my mind, my spirit to comprehend. It was extremely traumatizing. And I had talked to my midwife at like a follow-up appointment that I was struggling to kind of digest all of these events that had happened to me. But I don't think I like rated high enough on whatever kind of like scale they give you. They give you like a questionnaire for postpartum depression. So she didn't really think I had serious postpartum issues. She gave me the name of like a support group, I think. But other than that, I was essentially like cleared. And I, as time went by, I would try to tell myself, like, this is what everyone else was telling me too, like, your baby's okay, you're okay. Like, those were terrible things that happened, but they're over now. And, everyone's good. And it kind of was just like glossing over all these horrible
Mhm.
things that had happened. And I was just really like, angry that these things happened. I couldn't understand why. Like, why, what did I do to deserve these horrible experiences? But then on the other side, I would feel guilty and think, well, at least my baby survived, and, at least I'm here. So it was like I was having this cognitive dissonance within myself, and it was just making me feel crazy, to be honest with you. So I went on for a long time, just kind of shoving all of this down, like sweeping it under the rug and just moving on with motherhood, because now I had a toddler and an infant, and I had to be there for them. I went back to work after, a relatively short maternity leave, my 12 weeks or whatever I was given. And it's just like I was just thrust into this, working mom role. And going from 1 to 2 kids doesn't sound like it's going to be a big jump, but it is. I'm telling you, like,
Yes.
you and like your partner never get a break because you each have a kid. And so, like
Right.
it's just nonstop. And so I was dissatisfied in my job. That was one problem I was having. I never had dealt with the trauma from my son's birth and then my medical experience. And I was just, to be honest with you, I just found myself in a place that I was just like miserable. I was just trying to get through the days. And again, I was feeling guilty because I had beautiful family and a house and like all these things that you're supposed to be happy about having. And I felt grateful for them, but I just felt like I was just suffering inside. There was something wrong.
Mhm.
And to cope with that for many years, actually, it took me a while to finally seek out help. To cope with that, I turned to alcohol because there's this whole mommy wine culture in our society that says, we know that motherhood sucks and it's awful and it's draining, but just have some wine at night and everything will be okay. And so, I kind of fell into that trap, and it would make me feel like an adult again. Like, I was myself, and I just kind of like drowned my trauma and all of this crappy stuff that I didn't want to think about. And so that went on until my daughter was entering kindergarten. And I just came to a point where I realized that alcohol was not my friend anymore. It was not helping me with these traumas and all these things I had going on in my life. And it was actually causing problems in my life. Like I was not showing up as my best self for my employer, for my husband, for my children. And I just made the decision that I didn't want to drink anymore. And so I went on, I quit cold turkey. I quit alcohol. I said I'm never going to drink again. And very luckily for me, I kept to that promise. And I'm headed towards 6 years sober now, which I'm extremely proud about. So I started down a recovery journey. And then I also started finally with some therapy, because that's really what I needed. I needed to
Mhm.
get through my PTSD. I did some EMDR work, and I finally found myself again. And it was really nice to discover her after all of that.
Wow. What a profound, intense journey. And
It
you
is when I
meant
look back on it. Yeah.
and you mentioned EMDR. I'm not really familiar with that. Can you elaborate further?
Yeah, so I don't actually know what it stands for, but
Okay.
it's like eye movement desensitization, something like that. It's a modality of therapy that uses you like you tap yourself in
Mhm.
a specific way. So there's like a somatic component, and your therapist, who has to be trained in this modality, you basically walk through the traumatic event while you're doing these tapping, and then also they're like you're looking at different points. And so there's evidence or studies that show that this modality is able to actually rewire like the neurons in your head to make the traumatic event not so triggering to you anymore.
Right.
And so the process itself, like when you are revisiting the traumatic event and doing the EMDR, can be very intense. Like you're basically reliving
Mhm.
the experience, which can be really difficult. But I will say, even though it was hard, it has really helped improve my ability to look back at those events and not be so upset, sad, triggered by them. And I think it was really important for me to learn too, like, I was never going to feel happy that those events occurred. Like, no one wants that to happen to them. But I didn't want to feel so upset and sad and angry about them. I just wanted to come to more of a place of like neutrality.
Mhm.
And now I am in that more neutral space. Like before, every time it got to be my son's birthday, I would go into this like depression. I would be so sad. Like I couldn't celebrate his birth because to me it was so awful and terrible and reminders of what we had both gone through. But now that doesn't happen anymore, so I don't have that like intense grieving period. I can celebrate his birth, and it was our journey, and it might not have been the way like I had ever pictured it, but it's still our story, and it's something that bonds us too.
Right. So how old is your son now?
He's 8.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you were going through your postpartum depression, how did that affect your spouse?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be honest with you, I think like I said, I really tried to sweep all of this under the rug. And so I tried to like push forward and have on a happy face and pretend that everything was okay. So he definitely is a very supportive partner and has always been a really involved dad. And so if there was just a day that I was laying on the couch and really just couldn't do much, he would just go into dad mode and take over. And so he just supported me by not pushing me to, talk about things too much that I wasn't ready to talk about. And he just jumped in like without me having to ask and do what needed to be done for our kids.
Wonderful. He's a keeper for sure.
Oh, he is. And I mean, and to also think like he went through these experiences as well. He was there when our son was born. He almost had his wife die a week later. Like those are really intense events for him too. And I was concerned that, he was going to have to do some healing on his
Mhm.
own. But he has his own way of dealing with things, and so he says he's all good, but I did a lot more. But it's just important to note like partners experience these things as well.
Yeah. And did you manage to go to a support group?
Yes. So at one point I did go, it was called like a traumatic birth support group. And so all of the mothers in this group had experienced births that didn't go to plan. And we all went around and shared our experiences. And it was just so interesting to hear from other women because people don't talk about this a lot of the times, like people who had to get C-sections or, who like their medical providers didn't listen to them or their child was born with something that they didn't anticipate. Like you don't really hear about this very much. And it was so nice to be in a like-minded community where we all could understand each other and get that it's okay to feel disappointed even if we are still have a happy healthy baby in the end, like we all understood each other. And
Right.
so I loved that group. That helped me a lot.
And you mentioned that this is not really talked about much. Well, in your opinion, why do you feel that is the case?
I think it's very people, there's so much stigma and shame surrounding if you're not the perfect mom, we're supposed to have all these maternal instincts and we're supposed to be martyrs for our children. And, I think society views it as selfish if you want to complain about anything, or, they want you to feel guilty if you're not loving every second of your pregnancy and postpartum and motherhood. And so we're like forced to stay quiet because we don't want to be judged. I didn't want to be judged, like this is just popping up for me right now. Another thing that I was so sad about after my son was born is we had this like beautiful baby book for my daughter with pictures from the delivery room. And I
Oh,
didn't get to have that with my son because they had taken him right
right.
away. And I was so upset about that. That bothered me so much that I wasn't going to have this picture perfect baby book like his sister was going to have. And at the end of the day, like it really doesn't matter. We have pictures of the first time that I saw him in the NICU. And like I said, like our story is different than my daughter's birth, and that's okay. It was a different situation, and
Right,
we have different stories, and that's okay.
right. So with you having gone through postpartum depression, what are some misconceptions about postpartum depression that you would like to clear today?
So I think what we see in the media usually are extreme cases of postpartum depression, like where they border on like postpartum psychosis. So it's like usually results in, the death of a mother or a baby, which is extremely tragic. But there is a huge spectrum of postpartum depression, and none of it should be discounted because in the end, it's negatively affecting mothers and children and families in general. And so even though somebody may look or act like everything's fine and they're managing, they might not. There's not really visible signs. You can't tell what's going on in a person's head. And so I just think that people have this view that, mom is outwardly acting crazy and saying, she wants to hurt herself or her children, when that's a very extreme version, and there's a lot more on the spectrum, and women suffer in silence a lot. So.
Yeah. Wow. Now with your children like almost grown, they're growing up, do you sometimes fall back into, like depression, I guess, like
I
do you
wouldn't
have memories of what happened and then do you kind of like feel a little bit upset about it?
Yeah, so I definitely, when I first got sober, had a lot of mom guilt about, oh God, I must have messed up my children for life. Like there was this, mom who went to work and then drank after her kids went to bed. And, I wasn't present and enjoying every single second of their childhood. And I must have messed them up for life. I definitely felt a lot like that back then. But thankfully, like my kids, they don't remember me not sober anymore. Like they know that mommy doesn't drink and that this is my lifestyle choice and how I choose to live. I don't like they ask me like, should I try a beer when I grow up? And I'm like, you get to make your own decisions,
Right.
like, I'm not anti-alcohol for them. I want them to figure things out on their own. But they don't remember me prior to this version of me. And that makes me really happy. Yes, every now and then I catch myself and be like, oh, remember that like party, or remember when I did this or did or said this stupid thing. But I acknowledge it, I witness it, and I'm like, yep, that happened, but we're not there anymore. We're here right now. And right now, everything is good. Everyone is happy. I am showing up as the best version of me and as a mom to my kids now. And so they have like this saying in the recovery community. It's like, you can glance in the rear view mirror, but you don't want to look there. You
Mm,
want to look straight ahead.
right.
So anytime I catch myself looking in the rear view, I'm like, okay, your glimpse is over. Look ahead now. And so I really try to focus on that.
I like that. I like that so much that I can use that too because I tend to
Yeah,
glance in the rear view mirror a lot.
exactly. There's nothing we can do to change it, right? So it's
Hmm.
like, why dwell on it? Like we're only in control of what we're doing in this moment. We're not even in control of the futures. It's just right now.
Exactly. I like that. So looking back now, what would you say to your younger version of yourself, the one who, was suffering with postpartum depression and that version of yourself that was trying to cope the best way she could?
Hmm. I would say you are worthy and deserving to have a wonderful life. I think I didn't have a lot of that self-value or worthiness about myself. I thought, like I said, I was trying to figure out like why I deserved this, quote unquote. Like, I don't know. And I just would have told her to get help sooner because there were so many other resources and options out there that could have helped me besides the crappy band-aid of alcohol, that
Mhm.
wasn't even helping me, it was making things worse. I just didn't seek out that help because I don't think I was worthy of it. So I would just tell myself, you're worthy of all the help and love and support that you need, that you deserve, and to ask for it because there's so many people out there that are willing to help.
Right. All right. So I want to shift now to your business because you had such a very intense journey, and now you're such an empowered woman because you're a founding attorney of your own law firm. That's amazing. So,
Thank you.
share with us a little bit how you got into the practice of law.
So I always wanted to be an attorney since I was a very little girl. I didn't know any lawyers, not in my community, my family. I knew that this was the career for me. So I went to college, right into law school. I passed 2 bar exams. So I had done it. I was a lawyer, but I couldn't get a job when I graduated. And
Okay.
so I ended up taking a job at my law school that I had just graduated from in the admissions department. And I was like, you know what? This will just be a short-term gig. It allowed me to travel. And I said, I'll just do this for a little while until I find a legal job. Well, in that time period, I got married. This is when I had my 2 children, and a short-time gig turned into like 7 years at this
Wow.
time. And this is, I kind of mentioned it before, I was very unsatisfied there because I wasn't doing the dream job that I had always wanted to do. And I had the qualifications and I felt just very stuck.
Hmm.
Um, so actually, after I went through all of this with my son and I got sober, that is what gave me the confidence to finally start practicing law. Because I told myself, if I can get through all of that, then I can do it. I am a lawyer. What am I doing settling in this kind of a life? I am
Yeah.
worth more. I got that confidence. And so I applied and I ended up getting my first legal job, and it was in my dream field of family law, and I was thrilled. And so I worked there for a few years and I did really well and rose up the ranks. I was a supervising attorney there and I had a team of attorneys that I was working with. And then I got to another kind of like, I don't know, crossroads in my life. And I was like, you know what? I can do this on my own. I can practice law my own way, the way I think family law should be practiced with my values and, putting out the marketing messages that I think are important. And so it was about a year ago right now that I left my previous firm and opened up my own business. And yeah, we're coming up on our first anniversary and it has surpassed my wildest expectations. I've been able to hire staff. I'm
Wow.
still hiring more. We have lots of business. I didn't even know if I was going to be able to pay my mortgage the first month. It was a huge gamble, but it was amazing because even when I shared with my family and my closest friends that I was thinking of doing this, I was expecting someone to be like, "Oh no, Jolee, are you sure you want to do that?" Like to give me some kind of like pushback. Not a single person did. They all told me they knew I could do it and that when I put my mind to something, nothing's going to stop me. And so their confidence in me helped me make that jump. And I'm so glad that I did. I'm never looking back.
Yeah. So do you think what you went through with the postpartum depression, do you think that in some way made you stronger?
Absolutely. I have shown myself that I am a resilient person and that I can get through hard times. And
Right.
like I said, I learned my worthiness, my value, that I am worthy of love. Like I got my confidence. All of this came because of that crap that I went through and I got through it and I'm still here. And I'm just so grateful for it, even though, it was awful and terrible. It was a turning point in my life and I would still be stuck if it didn't happen.
Right. So this leads me to my next question. So what did you learn from this whole experience? I know you said that you are worthy, but what else did you learn?
I think the biggest and most important thing that I learned through all of this is that I can trust myself. When I was drinking and depressed and had unhealed trauma, I didn't really trust myself. I couldn't rely, I wasn't reliable to myself. But now I know my word is good. Like when I put my mind to something, like my friends and family say, I'm going to achieve that. So I think the biggest thing I learned was that I can trust myself.
Yeah, I like that. For you to just stop drinking like cold turkey, that takes a lot, right?
It
And you
was,
stuck to it. That's
yeah.
amazing.
And from what I've heard in the recovery community, a lot of times people, have like some relapses and need to start over. And I'm really grateful to that I haven't experienced that. I think I have such a strong motivation to not want to go back to the way I was living my life that I just, to be honest with you, because, you know, some people are like, oh, why don't you just like have one or two? Why can't you moderate? And I'm like, you know why? Because that requires like brain power. And I don't
Mhm.
want drinking to take up any more of my brain like cells. Like I've spent enough of my life thinking about drinking, being ashamed about it, being upset about it. I just don't want to think about it anymore. So when you just take it off the table,
Mhm.
it's so much more freeing and relieving, to be honest with you.
Right, right.
Mhm.
So, where can people find you if they want to work with you? I know you practice in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, correct?
Yes, yes. And so our website is foundations with an S, familylaw.com. And that is all of our social media. We have Facebook, Instagram. And then also, like you mentioned, I host Divorce Detox. It's a podcast,
Yes.
comes out every Sunday. And I co-host that with my friend, Lisa Happ. She's also a certified divorce coach. So I think it's nice of having like the legal, you know, standpoint and then her coaching experience. We have a lot of fun on that. So that is Divorce Detox and it's available on all major podcast platforms.
Wonderful. So, share a little bit on how that journey started for you both, you and Lisa.
Yeah, so Lisa and I met through a mutual friend. She actually designed the websites for both of our businesses and she thought, you know, we would benefit from meeting each other. And so we just had a one-on-one and we just instantly clicked. We were so in alignment in our values and the way we helped our clients. And we wanted to do some kind of collaboration together. So we threw around some ideas and we thought about like some video series or, you know, like webinars. And I just said to her, I was like, why don't we do a podcast? Because I love podcasts. I listen to them all the time when I'm driving or getting ready in the morning. I always have
Mhm.
my earbuds in. And I just thought that would be a great medium, especially for our target audience, who is usually like working moms, to be able to, you know, digest our content. And so we've done, I think, 37 episodes so
Wow.
far. And yeah, we've started it a little over no, a little less than a year. So we're coming up on our first year too. But we have a great time and we also interview guests as well. And so we've had some like survivor stories for women who've come out of abusive relationships and where they are now. And it's just so inspiring. And I get to just, like I said, talk raw and real about what actually happens in family court because it's a very messy place and I don't hold
Yeah.
back.
Right. I'm glad because
Yes.
that's education for people, right? You know.
Exactly. And that's what the point of it is to, you know, offer accessibility to this information because there's so many questions and misconceptions about family court and divorce and custody. And so we just try to, you know, provide our experience and what we've seen in our own cases and clients.
So this leads me to my next question. So with divorce and family law being such an intense subject area, how do you maintain your center when you're dealing with high conflict cases?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'll tell you, it's a evolving journey, and I still struggle with it from time to time because I care very deeply about my clients and their families. And, you know, they're not just a case file to me. I get to know them very well, and we have a really great bond. So how I avoid it is, I'll tell you, the biggest thing that I do is because I deal with so much high conflict in my professional life in my personal life, I avoid conflict like the plague. So, you know, people will say to me, oh, Jolee, why don't you join PTO or why don't you join this committee? And I'm like, nope, I'm tapped out. Like I give all of that to my clients and I just want peace. I want things to be easy in my personal
Yeah.
life. So I really try to hold that boundary. And then we have a small homestead on our property. So we have chickens and ducks and goats. So we have some farm animals and I love them because they get me outside in nature every day.
Mm,
You know, go take care of them in the morning and in the evening. No excuses. I have to do it in the rain and the snow because they depend on me. So I love just being outside with my animals. Obviously, it's very grounding to be outside
right.
and be with them, my furry and feathered friends. And I have a meditation practice. I love the law of attraction. So I'm actually going to my first Abraham Hicks workshop coming
No
up.
way.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's coming to Boston. It's on May 4th, and I'm taking my mom with me, and she has no idea about any of this. So I'm really
That's
excited.
gonna blow your mom's mind.
I told her, I was like, just trust me. So I really, and I listen to hypnotherapy tracks. So I try to use all the self-care tools that I can. But I'll be honest, it is a stressful life. It can be hard. I can take my work home with me and, think about things when I should be focusing on my kids. So it's an ongoing process, but I'm doing the best I can.
I like it because you are such a heart-centered attorney. And, I'm not like reading on anybody's parade, but there are some attorneys out there who are more conflict-driven rather than heart-centered.
That's for sure. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start my firm, because we approach family law that we don't want to blow up the relationship, because most of our clients still have to co-parent together and they have children. So, we try to mediate, we do conflict resolution, we try to negotiate settlements instead of having to go to court to litigate. Some cases end up there and it's out of our control, but we at least start from a place that we try to come to a resolution between the parties, just because I think that's the best way to maintain their relationship that they're going to have for many years in the future.
And what do you do if you have one party who is refusing to settle or negotiate or, go to mediation? So how do you handle such cases where one party is not willing to settle or resolve the issues?
They're called the obstructionist. So they just, they just don't want to engage in anything in good faith and just, try to make this as dramatic as possible. So luckily, I mean, there is something called a pretrial hearing that the court has before they'll schedule an actual trial. And so that's our opportunity to tell the judge, Your Honor, the other side is not negotiating good faith. Here's what the issues are. And the judge will usually try to give feedback to settle the case, because the judge doesn't want to have trials either.
Right.
And the court actually requires us to have a settlement conference before we get to that pretrial hearing. So if they're not engaging in that, then that's not going to look well on them. So basically, we just have to out them to the judge and get the judge to rein them in, because ultimately they're the ones who are going to make the decisions anyway.
Right. Okay. Good point. So we have a few minutes left, and I have a signature closing question here that I ask all my guests. What is your closing message for humanity to help in our collective healing and empowerment?
Oh, wow. That's a big one. Message for healing.
That's okay. Take your time.
Humanity. I would say that know that you are deserving and trust that good things are in store for you. Message to humanity.
I like that. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And I really enjoyed our conversation. And I just want to say you're such a empowered woman. It's amazing what you went through and how you healed yourself and transformed yourself. So this will be inspiration to many, many women, I'm sure.
Thank you. I hope it makes somebody feel not alone, because it can be, very isolating. And so I'm happy to share. Thank you for having me, Priscilla. I loved it.
Thank you. And for everybody who's watching and listening, thank you for your time. And until next time, bye for now.